I never really had a moment where I was like, yes, I made this awesome game and it's done and I succeeded, because everything was sort of like, no, you don't get to have, you know, the feeling. You don't have a moment of triumph. So it was very, you know, very weird, especially like when the game's subject is all about kind of these alternate realities, and then it felt like, just like, how could you have such incredible good luck to like have the successful game and then like have like the worst luck imaginable like at the same time? Yeah. It was very almost like a video game plot is kind of like how it felt to me.
Yeah.
I had like two of my best friends were both like heavily into NES, and they were talking about Super Mario and getting fire flowers and fighting Goombas before I even knew what Super Mario Brothers was. For Christmas, my father got me a gift card for Toys R Us. The NES, like the bare bones NES with Super Mario Brothers, I got that game, and that was like when I first really started getting into games on my own. But I was always drawing like robots and characters like, you know, Samus and the Ryu from Ninja Gaiden, you know, making up my own characters and stuff like that. You know, really going into that whole like nerd subculture. I didn't even know that that's what it was at the time, but, you know, Dungeons and Dragons follows off of that, and I'm sure you can predict the rest.
Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do in the future at that point?
Yeah, I think like in most of my childhood, I sort of thought like, oh, I want to be like a scientist or something like that. Like in my head, scientist meant, you know, spaceships and robots. You know, like I thought of it for the exciting things that lead from science. When I was in first, second, and third grade, I wrote some very like simple programs that were just like, you can type in a curse word and the computer would curse back at you. I kind of wonder like how much that maybe like later influenced it, like if I remembered any of that stuff when I went to college and I was actually accidentally enrolled in a computer science class instead of in a physics class. When it came to computer science and all these programming assignments, it almost seemed like it was kind of fun. But yeah, like I picked it up pretty easily, and I think like by my second semester of college, like it had like clicked in my mind, like, hey, like if I can program, like I can eventually program video games. I ended up making this Game Boy Advance game that was basically like a Metroid clone called Orn that still exists on the internet somewhere. Yeah, I'd say like from the time I was like a senior in college, like onward, then it was my goal to get a job in the games industry. Yeah, I was at EA for 3 years, from 2005 to 2008, and then that was when I moved to Las Vegas to work at Petroglyph. You know, during that time at Petroglyph, I think more indies were coming out, and you know, Braid had came out somewhere in there. I could have started writing a game 5 years ago. I could have had a game now, and that kind of like stuck in my head, like, well, these other people can do it, and it's just sort of like, why would I not do it? What's stopping me? Is it just because I'm lazy? You know, there really wasn't a reason, so I just started. Yeah, this is the first El Sonova, this one. Help us, we're dying, heal us. At that time, my office was just a laptop, and I would just sit down on the couch in the living room with Max next to me. He would just be there next to me, like nuzzling my arm or whatever as I coded or as I drew. I say to myself, like, this is just going to be so much work. Like, I envision the mountain of work that it takes to continue with this for another 4 years or however long it might have taken. So I think like I made this mental adjustment where like I figured out if I can make sure that whatever I'm currently working at is enjoyable and like gives me good feedback from day to day, and I can just keep that on repeat until I'm done, it will be a lot more doable. So I really I planned it out, and that's kind of how I came up with this process of where I would do the environments first and then do the animations and then do another thing and not go back and forth, because you know exactly what you're going to do next, and you can like kind of be thinking like, I have more of these ideas for what I'm going to do tomorrow, and you get better at it as you go, as you do that one thing. And that kept me from ever getting into a point where I'm just like, oh man, I'm slogging through collision physics, and like I still have to do all the art for like 8 more areas of the game that are huge. Whereas this was more like, okay, I'm done with all the environment art, and now I have the monsters. And if I ever thought like, oh man, there's too many monsters in this, I could think, well, but I have all the environment art is done. Like, I can just slap that right in there and it's ready to go. So it kind of like built on itself. You know, the further you went, the more pieces you had, and the more easier it was going to get when you get to the final stage and you're doing the level design. The game is almost its own thing, you know, its own entity outside of me, as opposed to like something I designed. Even though I did design it, it started to feel less and less like something I was just putting together, you know, in a way that happened to make sense, and to be more like something that is kind of happening and I'm just reporting on what I saw or thought, you know. And it's never really talked about in the game, but that's what it is in the background. You're basically looking at other worlds hanging down from the ceiling of this vast size of the solar system chamber that you're in. It was around 2012 when I'd finally like finished up the first area of the game. I put together a trailer. I don't know how this happened, but like it ended up being on some like minor indie media outlets. Other outlets saw those outlets and it just kind of like exploded. I set up like a Google alert for anything that used the word Axiom Verge. I tried to make it a weird enough name that nothing else would have it. And like it was actually keeping me up at night. It was very surreal for me that people that I had never met felt invested in this thing that I made alone on my couch with my dog. There was definitely like a lot, like I felt a lot of pressure. And I had all these people like telling me, even like coworkers came to me and people were saying like, oh yeah, you gotta do something. Like you can't, it can't wait. It has to come out now while there's buzz. You have to make a Kickstarter. You make $1 million right away, easy. Tom, you just gotta work on this all day and all night and get this finished in 2012, not 2013. And I didn't know what to do, and I remember writing an email to Jeremy Parish, who had written the 1UP article, like, hey, like, you're one of the main voices in the industry, and he's kind of the guy credited with spreading the word Metroidvania. And I said, like, what do you think? Do you think I should do a Kickstarter? And actually, he was sort of like, treat it like you've been treating it because it's your baby, and not like give it into the hands of the public. And so like, I was like, okay, like this has made the most sense of anything I've read so far. And that was kind of the thing that sealed the deal for me. Like, okay, I'm not going to do a Kickstarter. If I keep doing this and treating it like it's my hobby and not like the thing I'm doing for all these people, then it's going to follow the vision that I wanted for it. I sort of felt indebted to fans and whatnot just for publicizing the game in whatever way they could, and you know, making it be something that caught publishers and media outlets' attention. I pitched it to Sony, and some months later, like Sony actually decided we're going to have this be one of our Pub Fun titles. That was when I really started working on it in earnest. I started working on it full time. Yeah, I think so. I think it was pretty hard for her, like during that final year. You know, she wanted to be with me and out in the desert, but then it was kind of like she was with me out in the desert, but it was sort of like I was in my office working all the time now. Like I was either working 8 hours a day or I was at Petroglyph working part-time. Like that was amazing, you know, that she believed in me enough to do that. And, you know, it wasn't daunting. You know, it's interesting, like the easiest part of the game was definitely development of making the game. The hard part is, for me anyway, it's definitely like getting the word out, like interacting with the public and like the whole other element that Dan does, which is like finding more ways to expand on things. Dan, I wouldn't even be here having this interview if it wasn't for Dan.
Hello. Good to see you guys again.
Dan came onto the project, I think it was like in 2014. Like one of the first things he said was like, if it was me, like if I had been there, like your Sony contract would have been a lot better than what it was. And were it not for Dan, probably PlayStation 4 and Vita, those releases would be the end. But because of Dan, like, there continue to be more Axiom Verge releases on other platforms, more news about it continuing to happen. And then there's the game right there. You could either click on it or press A for launch. It's just been a couple of days since we got this working. There's no audio at the moment.
I worked at Nintendo of America for about 9 years, where I started up the indie games business there, way back in the WiiWare days, at a time when indie games were not really a part of the industry. And at the time, when I was putting together the strategy for WiiWare, I was really hoping to find more innovative, creative content. Games like World of Goo, Cave Story, Super Meat Boy. Of course, I didn't make any of those games, but I did help a lot of those developers kind of find their way to getting their games out there.
As much as we love the Vita, this system is like what we always hoped the Vita 2 would be, although it's actually like a kind of like a Wii U 2.
Yeah.
It's its own thing, I guess.
So I noticed that the right thumbstick doesn't change. And then after I left Nintendo, it made a bit of the news. It was the news story of the week. And then Tom reached out to me and he said, I've got this game that I've been working on for the last 4 years. We should probably talk. I guess I am the first person in history to use the address disruptor on the Switch, since no one else has gotten this far. I always like those historical firsts. Sure, I think that there were probably 2 moments for me where that really stood out as like, oh wow, this game is very different and special. The first one is when I found the address disruptor, a really cool feature that was completely new. And then the other moment where I was just like, oh my god, this is amazing, was that floating head taxi. I almost laughed out loud the first time I saw that, and I was like, oh god, this game's amazing. Well, he told me it was just one person, so I fully believed him. But it is interesting, like, you'll read comments online where they'll talk about, like, yeah, this guy, one guy made Axiom Verge, and then somebody will say, like, but not the music. Like, there's no way, I'm sure he didn't also do the music. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't count. Sometimes Tom would finally chime in and like, yeah, no, I made the music too, and it's the easiest part. So Tom says it's the easiest part. That may be true for some people.
You're looking at these like, I had no idea how psychotic my business partner was.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what goes on inside Tom's head. As we were getting closer and closer to launch, and press were getting more and more excited, and fans were getting really excited, what if, the game takes off in a big way? And, I asked him, like, so what if you become a multi-millionaire, and you can retire? What would you want to do with the rest of your life? And Tom's response was, I don't know, I'd probably just make another game.
So there was no expectation that it was going to be successful as it was?
No, definitely not. If I could make enough on this game to live on my own, like, I wouldn't have to leave Max at home when I went to work. This was sort of like what I was thinking, like, I could be there for you, Max, was my thought. And like, that he died, like, when the game finally was shipping was so, it was just like, how could this happen at this moment, just when, like, it's finally starting to happen, that, like, I can have that perfect life. I can just play with my dog all day, I can take him everywhere I want to go and not have to work all the time. However much I cared about the game, it sort of seemed like, oh man, the game is launching and I could just care less. I really like all I could think of was like, how could this be real? Like, how could it be real that my dog is gone now?
Yeah, I love these credits where it says developed solely by Tom Happ.
Yeah, I had one reviewer actually say that they thought I was a gigantic egomaniac for doing that. So
Really?
like,
That's-
like I really need the what's the word? The validation of having people tell me it was good. It's kind of not as important to me to have them say that. And in some ways, it makes me feel uncomfortable when people are like coming out like, this is the best thing ever. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if that's really the way, like the response that is the perfect response for this, you know? Like people saying like, the dream you had last night, that really vivid dream is the best thing ever. And then people on the internet are now commenting on your dream like, your dream should have been shorter. Your dream should have like not done this. It feels definitely weird to have it be public, I think, in some ways, yeah. The game did well and like it sold a lot. So like when I got my first payment of the game and it was like, you know, really amazing, but at the time I was in the ER with my son, you know, who was getting irreversible brain damage at the time. Burp?
Oh, that's rude. Bend your knees, baby. Come on, bend your knees.
It's called kernicterus. It doesn't affect the cognitive parts of the brain. It only affects a tiny little part of it called the globus pallidus that's sort of like responsible for coordinating motor control.
Come on, stay still, baby.
So
You can do it.
he's kind of got like baby Parkinson's is what it amounts to. It gives him a lot of like involuntary movements that he has to keep under control, and then changes to the muscle tone where some muscles are like a lot tighter and then some are much too loose. And we have to go through a lot of physical therapy to help him learn how to work around that. The brain can be retrained to a degree to find alternate pathways, and that's what this is about. This one is about kind of showing him how to put pressure,
Bear
like
weight on his knees.
yeah, bear weight on his
legs.
knees and lift his head, like use the neck muscles.
He's kind of unstable, even though he's almost 2.
Right.
He doesn't sit, he doesn't stand, he doesn't crawl. He might never walk. The good thing is he's very good-natured. He doesn't know he's disabled. We had no health insurance for a while. And I did my best to ensure whatever little we had a very safe and healthy pregnancy. But unfortunately, shortly after he was born, no matter what I did, I couldn't protect him.
It's like all of the help that we got was sort of for during the pregnancy, but then after it, it's kind of like they're like, okay, you're done now, but you're not done. And jaundice is an incredibly serious thing that I think happens to over like 50% of kids, and there's this kind of like wives' tale that you just put them in the sun and they'll be okay. But that's like completely wrong, although that is what like the nurses told us to do. We found out later that, you know, when you have jaundice, you're supposed to come back the next day for a checkup. There was none of that, so it was kind of very late. By August 10th, they took a blood test. They took their time processing it. Like that afternoon, they finally got the results back and called us and said, like, hey, like, it's an emergency. It's been an emergency since 8 a.m. and you didn't know because we didn't tell you. And you've got to go to the ER now. By the time like midnight of that day, like he was actually like having seizures and like arcing his back and like screaming his lungs out. We had seen like what this kind of brain damage does, and like it's basically a lifelong thing that there's no cure for. And then I finally got the first payment. I'm like, well, it looks like at least we can afford, you know, this for a little bit. It was a sizable sum, but it was just like, it happened at a time when, you know, all you're thinking about is like, wow, the worst thing I could think of, like I couldn't even have thought of something as bad as this to happen, you know?
I have these nightmares where he gets trapped and he's unable to escape because he just doesn't have the physical ability to. And if he had received treatment a couple of hours earlier, he might be able to do everything he was born to do.
Your son has this life of torment, and you have to watch and like can't do anything to help it. You know, in a way, like the build-up to the game release was like where I got most of my, you know, sense of accomplishment from. After it released, it was sort of like mostly downhill, you know, like emotionally speaking.
Yeah, it was a tough time for him, and so a lot of our conversations just were, you know, in a way, kind of maybe therapy sessions where Tom was able to talk about it with somebody.
That it's so rare. Most indies, like, they're never successful. That it's very rare to be successful, and it's very rare to have a child with kernicterus. Most doctors stop it before it ever even happens, and this seemed like, how could the two things happen at the same time? Chloe believes firmly that the universe is sentient and is out for us, and I'm kind of wondering, maybe, you know, like more and more, is she not right about that?
After the initial, you know, year or so of success, he was able to buy a home to support his family, where we are now recording, and he has gotten a lot more stable financially as a result. But yeah, there is the long-term concern of, you know, how long will, you know, the revenue from this initial game last, especially in light of the fact that his son's healthcare costs are going to continue to be expensive the way healthcare does in this country. So, so I'm always going to be on the lookout of, you know, for how do we continue to, you know, keep Axiom Verge going so that Tom can continue to support his family. Thank you, Chloe, for everything.
Yeah. All right. Bye. Yeah, definitely. You know, Dan and I joke that I can't talk about what I'm working on right now, or he'll kill me, which he won't. But you know, it might be better if he did. Sometimes I think. Yeah, it definitely is like a totally different feel. You know, developing games now, like after this has happened, than as opposed to before, because there's this kind of like urgency now that's sort of like, if I don't make this next game, how am I going to make sure that, like, when my son is 80 years old and me and Chloe are gone, you know, that he can still, like, pay his mortgage or whatever at that time. The way I feel about things I can't control is like, I just have to wait for them to pass by and be over. Whereas, you know, for Axiom Verge or whatever game I'm working on, like, I feel like I can make this thing better, you know. I can do something for this thing, even if when I'm done with it, my life is still the same. At least I had control over this, like, fictional world.